Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving straight into some of the most critical, absolute high-stakes situations you're going to encounter in real estate. We're working through a scenario-based guide on compliance and liability. We'll be looking at everything from invisible toxins hiding in a home all the way to aggressive federal cleanup laws. Look, in this industry, what you don't know can absolutely hurt you. So let's build you a clear, bulletproof roadmap.
Okay, here is a quick look at our roadmap for today. Number 1, environmental hazards and disclosures. Number 2, navigating CERCLA and EPA liability. Number 3, fair housing steering traps. And we'll cap it all off with number 4, a 5-question scenario quiz to put your knowledge to the test.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Environmental Hazards and Disclosures. So, environmental threats usually show up in one of two ways, and they are basically the first major hurdle you'll face out in the field. On one hand, you have invisible threats. Think about radon. It's a naturally occurring, completely odorless, tasteless, radioactive gas. Because you can't see it or smell it, the law requires specific warning statements on residential sales contracts and lease agreements. On the other hand, you've got physical hazards, like lead-based paint. This requires a much more hands-on regulatory approach. We're talking federal pamphlets, strict hazard disclosures, and literally granting the buyer a specific window of time to get an independent inspection. Now, if you take away just one number from this entire explainer, make it 1978. Seriously, when you see a residential dwelling built before 1978, alarm bells should immediately start going off in your head. Why? Because that specific year triggers the Federal Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act. That act mandates that lenders and sellers provide buyers with a federal disclosure pamphlet, disclose any known lead paint hazards, and, most importantly, guarantee buyers a 10-day window to conduct their own independent inspection. So remember, 1978 is your magic number. But here's the thing, environmental hazards aren't just lurking inside the house. Sometimes they're in the land itself. Let's talk about flood zones and wetlands. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, literally maps out what they call special flood hazard areas. If a property sits in one of these zones and the buyer is using a federally backed mortgage, flood insurance is completely mandatory, no exceptions. Then we have government-regulated wetlands. You can't just pave over wetlands to build a house. Their presence can actually render a lot totally useless for development unless you go through massive, expensive, bureaucratic mitigation. Because both of these factors drastically impact a property's value and utility, they are considered material facts, and that means they absolutely must be disclosed to buyers. All of this really highlights one of your core statutory duties in real estate, which is dealing honestly and fairly. Thanks to landmark rulings like Johnson v. Davis, which cemented the duty to disclose all known latent defects, we know that agents should never, ever guess or speculate about environmental hazards. If a client asks you a highly technical question about the structural integrity of a roof, or if they're worried about environmental toxins, you do not try to calculate that risk yourself. You protect your client, and frankly, you protect your license by making a defensive professional referral to a licensed inspector. Stay in your lane. Moving right along to Section 2, navigating CERCLA and EPA liability. Now we're shifting gears to federal laws governing environmental cleanup. And pay attention, because these regulations can financially devastate a landowner who isn't prepared. Let's demystify this intimidating acronym. CERCLA stands for the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. It's administered by the EPA, and it establishes what's known as federal Superfund liability. Simply put, it's the law that provides both the money and the legal teeth to manage and clean up hazardous waste sites. What's genuinely terrifying about CERCLA is just how aggressive it is. The liability here is joint, several, and retroactive. What does that actually mean for you? It means the EPA can hold literally any past or present owner in the chain of title fully responsible for the entire cleanup cost. It doesn't even matter when the contamination originally occurred. The only way out is if the owner miraculously qualifies for a highly specific exemption called the innocent landowner defense. It's intense stuff. Okay, let's head into Section 3, fair housing steering traps. You know, even the most well-meaning agents can accidentally violate federal law if they aren't on their toes. Imagine you're showing a beautiful home. The buyer is chatting with you, and suddenly they ask this highly dangerous question. Is this a good neighborhood for families of my faith? The tension there is real. They are genuinely asking for your help. But if you answer that question directly, you are stepping right into the illegal practice of steering, which means channeling buyers toward or away from specific neighborhoods based on a protected class. So how do you handle it without alienating your client? Here is the exact defensive script you need to use. You simply reply, I am prohibited by fair housing laws from discussing neighborhood demographics. However, I can refer you to local public demographic data and community resources so you can make your own determination. Boom. That script keeps you honest, it's still helpful, and it keeps you 100% compliant with federal law. To really understand why you need that script, you have to know the rules of the game. Established way back in 1968, the Federal Fair Housing Act lists 7 protected classes. We've got race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, and familial status, which, by the way, explicitly includes families with kids under 18 and pregnant women. Just as importantly, you have to know what is not federally protected under this specific act. That includes age, marital status, and sexual orientation. Though, a quick side note here, always check your local and state laws because they often add their own extra protections. All right, it's time for Section 4, our 5-question scenario quiz. Let's simulate the high stakes of exam day, or just active fieldwork. Here is Scenario 1. A buyer views a home that's being sold completely as is. They turn and ask you, the listing agent, if the 15-year-old roof leaks. Now, you know for a fact it has been repaired twice. Do you just stay quiet because it's an as-is contract? What's your move here? The correct response ties right back to that Johnson versus Davis ruling we talked about. An as-is clause does not, I repeat, does not excuse you from disclosing known latent defects. First, you absolutely have to disclose the past leaks and repairs that you know about. Then, when it comes to the roof's current integrity, you pull out your defensive script. I do not have technical information on the roof's current integrity, and I recommend you hire a licensed professional roof inspector to evaluate it. Ready for Scenario 2? You are listing a residential property that was constructed in 1975. Think about that date. What 3 federal requirements must you navigate? Take a second. Because that home was built before our magic number, 1978, it automatically triggers the Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act. So you must do 3 specific things. 1, provide the buyer with a federal lead paint disclosure pamphlet. 2, disclose any known lead paint hazards. And 3, grant the buyer a 10-day period to conduct an independent inspection. Moving to Scenario 3, a prospective buyer asks you about a property's location in regard to a flood zone. Do you just pull up Google Maps? Do you try to calculate their flood insurance rate on the back of a napkin? How should you actually direct them? The correct response is that you direct the buyer to obtain an up-to-date flood map directly from FEMA. Remember our golden rule. Agents shouldn't calculate flood risk themselves. You have to direct buyers to the authoritative data, which means FEMA's official special flood hazard area maps. Okay, Scenario 4. Under CERCLA, who exactly can the EPA hold liable for the massive costs of cleaning up a hazardous waste site? Try to remember those 3 scary legal terms we used earlier. The answer? Any owner in the chain of title. This perfectly illustrates just how intense federal environmental law really is. Because the liability is joint, several, and retroactive, pretty much anyone in the chain of title can be on the hook for the entire cost unless they can miraculously prove that innocent landowner defense. And finally, Scenario 5. A couple visits an open house you're hosting. They seem friendly, and they ask you how many families of their same national origin live in the subdivision. This is a classic, textbook bait into a steering violation. What is your best possible response? The absolute best, correct response is simply, I do not have that information to share with you. You cannot provide those numbers or guide them based on national origin because it's one of the 7 federally protected classes. By maintaining these strict boundaries and relying on professional referrals, you're not just protecting your clients, you're protecting your livelihood. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. The next time a buyer asks what seems like a completely innocent question, take a beat and ask yourself, am I just being helpful or am I about to accidentally tank my entire career? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. You've got this.